Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of those stories that you think you know until you realize you've been hearing someone else's version all along. Imagine this: the candlelight of an old monastery flickers across a wall of parchment scrolls, each one smelling faintly of dust, wax, and time itself. Somewhere among them is a name, faded, almost erased. You lean closer and the letters shimmer as though reluctant to be read. You probably won't survive this story in the same way you entered it, because once you see how one woman's presence quietly shaped and nearly vanished from the Bible, you can't unsee it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in the scriptorium of the ancient world. The walls hum with the sound of quills scraping across vellum. Monks in brown robes hunch over their desks, copying words they barely dare to question. Somewhere in that sea of ink and silence, a few trembling lines have been scratched out. No one speaks of it, but you can almost feel the missing name pulsing beneath the surface, like a heartbeat buried under centuries of dust. The mysterious woman, the one history couldn't quite erase, is hiding right there between the margins. You reach out to brush away the dust, and as the letters emerge, Maria, you hear a soft echo. Mary. But not the Mary of nativity scenes or Christmas carols. No, this one comes with a storm in her eyes and a question on her lips. This Mary was no passive figure kneeling at someone's feet. She was a thinker, a challenger, someone who listened deeply and spoke when others wouldn't. It's hard to believe now, but in the first few centuries after Christ, her story shimmered through early Christian circles like a secret flame. Historians still argue whether her influence was suppressed for political reasons or simply lost to time, but what's certain is that she once stood at the very heart of the faith, and then, suddenly, she was gone. As you look around that candlelit room, you can almost see the tension. The monks pretend not to notice the erasures, but one of them, an older man with tired eyes, pauses. He hesitates over a line, then dips his quill again. He doesn't cross out her name this time, he only sighs as though admitting defeat to silence. Maybe he knows that no matter how much ink you spill, some stories refuse to stay buried. Outside, the night presses against the stained glass. The world beyond the monastery doesn't care who wrote what, it just wants to sleep, but inside a quiet rebellion is being born. Every candle that flickers reminds you of her, a woman whose faith and intellect scared men powerful enough to build empires. Mainstream history tells you that the Bible was canonized through divine inspiration and careful consensus. That's true, mostly. But it's also true that politics, ego, and fear crept into the room like smoke. When early church fathers debated which gospels to include, they had to decide not just which words were holy, but which voices were safe. And a woman who dared to stand as equal among apostles? That wasn't a safe voice. You imagine her ghost moving between the desks now, watching these men copy lines about her while pretending she never existed. Maybe she laughs softly because she knows something they don't, that the truth has a strange way of surviving even when you bury it under dogma. The real historical fact here? By the 6th century, a pope officially declared Mary Magdalene, the woman you're about to follow through history, as the same person as the nameless sinner who anointed Jesus' feet. It was never written in the Bible that way, but the proclamation stuck. For nearly 1,400 years, that's how the world saw her. A repentant prostitute instead of a disciple. A cautionary tale instead of a co-teacher. And yet, centuries before that distortion, ancient communities had already whispered a different story. Some of the earliest Christian sects, Gnostics as later scholars would call them, saw her as someone closer to Jesus than anyone else. They said she understood his teachings not with her ears but with her spirit. One fragment from the Gospel of Philip even suggests that she was his companion. Historians still argue whether that meant a partner in faith or something more.
The debate burns on like an eternal candle no one dares to snuff out.
But tonight, you're not here to settle arguments. You're here to feel them, the clash between devotion and suppression, faith and fear. The way ink and ideology tangled over one woman's name until it nearly vanished.
You imagine holding that fragile parchment. It trembles in your hands, the edges brittle as burnt sugar.
You trace the fate letters Maria of Magdala. Suddenly the files charged. You are standing at the edge of history's greatest edit. Somewhere behind those walls, the Sea of Galilee shimmers in your memory, waiting to reveal her story.
Fooky little detail.
Some of the earliest depictions of Mary Magdalene in catacomb art don't show her weeping or repentant. They show her teaching. In one fresco from the 3rd century, she's standing with a scroll, surrounded by men listening. She's not the fallen woman you were taught about, she's the one holding the message.
You step closer to the flickering candle, your eyes following the dancing flame.
It's strange how fragile history is, how one stroke of a pen can alter the course of belief for millennia. Somewhere along the way, apostle to the apostles became fallen woman. But if you listen closely past the hum of centuries, you can still hear her voice whispering through the silence, "Remember me." A soft laugh escapes you, it's half awe, half disbelief. How could an entire civilization misplace such a crucial figure? You think about it as the candle gutters out, leaving you in the dark. Maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Maybe she was meant to disappear for a while, only to return when the world was ready to understand her again. Outside the monastery, dawn begins to bleed across the hills. The monks extinguish their candles, unaware that the story they tried to hide is just beginning to awaken. You step toward the door, parchment still in hand, and whisper her name once more, Mary of Magdala, the mysterious woman who changed the Bible forever, even when her name was almost erased from it. You feel the weight of time pressing around you, but also something else, a promise that the next part of her story will unfold beyond these stone walls, in the sunlight where truth can no longer hide.
The parchment in your hand grows warmer as morning light slips through the monastery's narrow windows. You blink and suddenly the centuries folly. You're no longer in a room full of monks, you're standing on the rocky shore of Galilee, sandals sinking into wet sand, waves curling lazily around your toes. The air smells of salt fish and wild thyme carried down from the hills.
The gulls scream overhead, gossiping about fishermen's nets and half-forgotten miracles. And there she is, the girl from Magdala. You spot her before anyone else does. She's barefoot, dark hair tangled by the wind, her skirt hitched just enough to move easily along the waterline.
The sun cuts through the morning hedge and turns her eyes into something fierce, something watchful.
She doesn't look holy or fragile, she looks alive. People in the nearby village whisper about her, calling her impulsive, proud, maybe even cursed. But you can see right away that she's simply different, born with too much thought for a world that rewards silence. Magdala itself hums behind her, a small fishing town, nets drying on poles, men shouting prices for tilapia and barley, children chasing goats between clay ovens. You can almost feel the heat from those ovens on your face. The Roman Empire's taxes press down like an invisible net over everyone, but she moves as if she doesn't feel it. She's not rich, not noble.
But her confidence unsettles the men around her.
A fisherman mutters that she asks too many questions about scripture, that she listens more carefully than any rabbi's student. Someone else claims she talks to herself by the water, maybe to unseen spirits. In a place where women fetch water and fade into the background, a woman who dares to think is both fascinating and dangerous. You walk beside her now, hearing the crunch of shells underfoot. She glances at you, though she doesn't really see you. You're just a ghost of the future, watching. Her lips move silently as she studies the horizon. It's almost as if she's listening for a voice that hasn't spoken yet. Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. Magdala was a real town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, known in Greek as Terrace, a center of fish processing and trade. Archaeologists have uncovered basalt foundations, ritual baths, and even a first-century synagogue, one of the few discovered from Jesus' time.
This means Mary of Magdala wasn't a vague legend. She came from a thriving port town full of merchants and travelers.
And here's your quirky tidbit. In one ancient text, Magdala can mean tower or elevated place. So technically, her name could mean Mary the Tower. Imagine that, centuries of sermons about a fallen woman, when her name itself whispered of strength and height. She stoops to gather pebbles, letting the water slip over her fingers.
You catch a hint of sadness in her, vomiting restless.
The stories say she was tormented, possessed by 7 demons, as the old translations go. But historians still argue whether that phrase meant literal spirits or simply mental anguish, trauma, or illness that ancient medicine couldn't explain. Whatever it was, it marked her. People avoided her eyes. Mothers pulled their children close.
Yet even now, before her healing, she carries a spark that refuses to dim.
Some evenings, when the fishermen's lamps blink across the water, she sits alone by the rocks, whispering prayers not from scrolls but from instinct. You can feel the weight of centuries bending toward this moment, the prelude to everything that will follow. In the distance, a rumor begins to ripple across Galilee. A teacher is wandering from village to village, speaking in parables that sound like riddles wrapped in love letters to the human soul. He touches lepers, eats with tax collectors, and talks about a kingdom not made of gold or marble. Mary hears his name for the first time, Yeshua.
And for reasons she can't explain, she feels the world tilt slightly.
You follow her the next morning as she makes her way inland. The path is dusty, lined with fig trees, cicadas singing like electric wires. She clutches a small jar of oil and a strip of bread. She's not sure why she's going, only that she must. Her steps grow steadier with each mile, like someone walking out of a dream.
When she finally reaches the crowd gathered around the teacher, it's chaos. Farmers, beggars, shepherds, all pressing close.
You can smell sweat, earth, and expectation. The man at the center doesn't look extraordinary. His clothes are simple, his beard untrimmed. But when he speaks, the world goes quiet.
Mary freezes. For the first time in years, the noise inside her mind, the fear, the shame, the whispers, stops. She doesn't cry out.
She just stands there, breathing evenly, as if her soul has been rearranged into something whole. He doesn't even look at her directly, yet somehow she knows she's been seen. The 7 demons, whatever they were, slip away like mist over the lake.
You've read healing stories before, but here, standing beside her, it feels intimate, human. Not magic, just recognition.
After the crowd disperses, she sits down in the shade of an olive tree. The other women watch her curiously. Some smile, others scowl.
She doesn't care. She feels light, as though she's been rewritten.
You can't help but grin. It's such a small, quiet moment, but history will echo from it. The woman from Magdala, once considered broken, now stands among the first true followers of the teacher whose words would reshape the world. Later, she returns home. The town hasn't changed, but she has. The market sellers still shout, the Roman patrol still stomps through the streets, but now she walks differently. People whisper again, but this time the whispers have wonder in them. A group of women gathers by the well to ask her what happened. She tells them about peace, not the kind Rome forces with swords, but the kind that grows in your chest like new breath. They don't fully understand, but one or two nod slowly. You realize you're watching the earliest spark of something enormous, a movement that will start with whispers like these. That night, under the stars, she looks toward the distant hills where she last saw him. The moonlight touches her face and she smiles, not in worship, but in recognition. For the first time she feels that she belongs not to fear, but to purpose. And here's where the subtle magic of history unfolds. The Gospel writers would later record her name more times than almost any other woman. Yet even in those lines, something feels incomplete, as if parts of her story were deliberately left out. Maybe they didn't know how to handle a woman who could hold her own beside a prophet. Maybe they feared how it would look, politically or socially. Or maybe, like so many things, it simply got lost in translation, buried beneath generations of interpretation.
You glance at her one last time before the vision fades.
She's walking along the shoreline again, only now there's a quiet strength in her posture. She no longer searches for meaning in the ripples, she carries it inside her. The world still calls her strange, but history is already taking notes. The wind picks up, scattering sand across your feet, and you can almost hear her laughter mixing with the tide.
You know she doesn't stay here long.
Soon she'll leave this quiet coast, follow the teacher across villages and mountains, through miracles and betrayal. But for now, the girl from Magdala stands at the edge of something vast, her story just beginning to rise like dawn over Galilee.
The wind shifts, carrying the sharp scent of salt and cedar as you watch her walk away from Magdala.
The lake shimmers behind her like a memory, and zombie the next richer her future whites, dark, uncertain, and alive with whispers. She doesn't travel alone now. There's a small group of women beside her, Joanna, Susanna, and a few others who've also been healed in ways no physician can explain. Their steps are steady, even defiant, for the roads they walk are meant for men, traders and soldiers, not wandering women chasing a preacher with no army and no home.
The sun burns up off the path, dusty and uneven.
You hear them laughing, sharing figs and water, talking about what it means to be free from things they can't name. He said we're salt, one of them murmurs, and light. Mary smiles faintly at that. It sounds simple, but she knows salt burns in wounds and light exposes what hides. You walk with them until the next town appears, clinging to the slope of a hill. The crowd is already there, pressing forward, eager to see the teacher. When he begins to speak, the noise melts into silence. He tells stories about seeds and soil, coins and shepherds, as if truth hides inside ordinary things.
Mary listens, utterly still.
Every word seems to rearrange the world inside her head. You can sense the connection, something invisible but undeniable, between teacher and student. It isn't romantic, though later centuries will twist it that way. It's deeper, like two souls recognizing the same language.
Then it happens, the moment people will talk about for centuries, but never fully understand. A woman from the crowd screams.
Her voice rips through the air like fabric tearing. She stumbles forward, eyes wide and unfocused, clutching her head. The crowd recoils. Some shout unclean, others cover their faces.
You can feel the fear spreading, thick and electric.
The teacher doesn't flinch. He steps toward her, murmuring something so quietly you can barely hear. The woman collapses, trembling, then goes still. When she looks up again, her face is calm, eyes clear. The crowd gasps. And then Mary feels it, a sudden shiver running down her spine. Memories she's tried to bury come flooding back, the nights of terror, the voices that weren't hers, the shame that clung like oil to her skin. She feels the echo of what was once inside her, the 7 shadows that ruled her life. You can almost see them, the 7 demons, not as winged creatures with horns, but as fragments of pain, grief, rejection, loss, fear, loneliness, guilt, and anger. 7 layers of darkness peeled away one by one. Historians still argue whether 7 demons meant literal possession or a metaphor for deep trauma. But to her, it doesn't matter.
What she knows is that something ancient and heavy has left her for good.
She stumbles back, clutching her chest, laughing and crying all at once. The teacher turns toward her, and for the first time their eyes meet directly. The look he gives isn't one of pity, it's recognition. "You're not broken," it says. "You're seen." You feel goosebumps run down your arms. This is the turning point, not just for her, but for the entire story of faith. Because while the men argue about who's greatest and the crowds chase miracles like fireworks, Mary begins to understand something quieter, something that can't be written on stone tablets. Later that evening, she sits by the fire. The others sleep, but she can't. She stares into the flames, remembering the storm that once lived inside her. The air smells of smoke and olive oil. Crickets sing their night hymn. You crouch beside her unseen. She whispers to herself, "I was 7 and 1. Now I'm 1 again." You smile. It's poetry born from relief. And here's a strange historical fact. In ancient numerology, 7 often represented completeness, perfection, the total sum of something. So in a strange way, the 7 demons may not have meant her corruption, but her wholeness being bound or distorted. To have 7 spirits expelled might symbolize restoration, becoming complete again.
Funny how meaning shifts with centuries, isn't it?
But the road to peace isn't smooth. Some of the disciples still glance at her with suspicion. In that world, a woman traveling with men, especially holy men, invites rumors. Even now, you can feel their discomfort simmering in the air. Yet she stays. She helps prepare food, comforts the sick, listens more than she speaks. At one point, Peter himself questions her presence. His tone is polite but sharp. "Why is she always among us?" He mutters. The teacher only replies, "Because she listens." The words hang there, quiet and immovable, like a mountain. You can't help but grin. That tiny sentence, so simple, will ripple through time. It will fuel endless debates, inspire secret gospels, and terrify bishops centuries later. All because one woman dared to listen differently.
A quirky little tidbit.
Medieval theologians later claimed that each of Mary's 7 demons represented one of the 7 deadly sins. But the twist is that list didn't even exist until hundreds of years after her death. The concept was invented in the 6th century, retroactively stapled to her story like a moral label. Talk about historical editing. Back by the fire, she wraps a shawl around her shoulders. The teacher is speaking softly to someone nearby. The night feels heavy, holy, and strangely intimate, not because of romance, but because of purpose. You realize something. She isn't following him out of gratitude. She's following because she understands him. The others hear parables about mustard seeds and nets, but she hears lessons about the soul and truth. Historians still argue whether this suggests that Mary was more spiritually advanced than the male disciples, or whether later texts exaggerated her role.
But either way, her insight stands.
As the stars blink awake overhead, you glance toward the hills. The world seems quiet, but history is stirring in its sleep. The woman once dismissed as mad is now sitting among apostles, her voice already reshaping the story.
At dawn you wake to the sound of footsteps.
The group is on the move again. Mary walks near the front, a faint smile on her lips. The light hits her face just so, and you notice something subtle. Peace, yes, but also authority. She carries herself like someone who's seen both darkness and dawn and knows they're part of the same sky. You can't shake the feeling that this scene, this simple walk on a dusty road, isn't being recorded anywhere. No scroll, no gospel writer will describe it. But the essence of it will survive, passed through whispers, retold by those who saw her courage and couldn't forget it.
You follow her for a while longer, the road winding between fig trees and stone ruins.
If er now entain chatwins as if sensing something, might the future.
The corner of her mouth curves upward. She doesn't need saving anymore. She's already walking toward her destiny. You blink and the vision fades again.
The shore of Galilee dissolves, replaced by a warm breeze from centuries ahead. You realize the story of 7 demons wasn't a curse at all, it was a metamorphosis. What once seemed like exorcism now feels like awakening. And as the world keeps spinning, as gospels get copied and edited and debated, that one transformation, Mary's moment of becoming whole, will remain the quiet center of everything that follows. The road winds south toward Capernaum, where stone houses cluster like barnacles along the lake shore. You walk beside her, the morning heat clinging to your skin, the smell of fish and olive oil thick in the air. Everywhere people are whispering about the rabbi who heals with a word and eats with sinners. They say he's dangerous. They say he breaks Sabbath laws and turns the world upside down.
But Mary of Magdala only smiles. For her, the world needed turning. You follow her through narrow alleys where children chase goats and women hang linens on lines between rooftops. The teacher's voice carries from inside a house nearby, low, steady, and calm, yet every sentence seems to crack something open inside whoever listens. You slip through the doorway behind her, ducking under the low beam. The room is packed. Men sit cross-legged in front, women hover near the edges. But Mary doesn't stay in the shadows. She edges closer until she's sitting among them, her knees nearly touching the teacher's feet. Someone gasps. You can feel the ripple of disapproval like a draft. Women aren't supposed to sit here. They're supposed to stay behind the curtain, serving food or fetching water, not learning scripture with men. A scribe frowns and mutters, she forgets her place. But the teacher doesn't correct her. He looks at her and says simply, those who seek find. And just like that, she belongs. You lean against the wall, watching her face.
The lamplight flickers across her features, focused, fierce, alive. She doesn't speak much, she listens. Every word he says seems to strike a chord she's been waiting her whole life to hear. The kingdom of God is within you, he says, and she closes her eyes. The phrase vibrates in the air, weightless and powerful. A mainstream historical fact for you: Jewish women in the 1st century rarely studied Torah formally. But archaeological evidence from synagogues in Galilee shows women did participate in religious life more than once taught. Some even funded synagogues and religious teachers. So while her presence here scandalizes the devout, it's not entirely impossible. She's simply doing what brave women have always done, showing up where they're told not to. The teacher continues speaking about forgiveness, humility, and love that transcends law. The crowd nods politely, but you can tell most don't fully understand. Mary, though, she gets it. You can almost see the words sinking into her like seeds. Later they'll grow into insights that frighten bishops and confound theologians. Then something unexpected happens. One of the men, Peter again, always outspoken, interrupts. Rabbi, he says, glancing at Mary, shouldn't women learn from their husbands instead? This is not our custom.
The room freezes.
The teacher looks at Peter with that familiar mix of patience and challenge. Then let their husbands learn from them, he says softly.
The crowd exhales, half shocked, half amused. Mary keeps her head bowed, but you catch the ghost of a smile. You can't help yourself, you chuckle quietly. It's a rare, almost playful défiance.
But beneath it lies something seismic. That small exchange will echo through generations of scholars, inspiring the endless debate: was Mary Magdalene truly a disciple or merely a follower? Historians still argue whether that day marked her formal inclusion among his students, but the energy in the room says yes. She isn't just a witness anymore. She's part of the conversation.
On the gathering ends, the teacher thanks the household for the meal. People disperse into the fading afternoon, their sandals kicking dust into the golden light. Mary lingers behind. She helps a woman gather bowls, then steps outside where the teacher is sitting alone beneath a fig tree.
She hesitates, unsure if she's allowed to approach. He gestures for her to sit.
You listened well, he says. She blinks. I try to understand. You understood more than most. There's no flattery in his tone, just truth.
The Breidsmolds trug the Fickeliede scattering Sonnenlicht across the ground. For a Moment everything falls still.
She wants to ask 100 questions, but all she can manage is, why me? Because you see, he says simply, and looks away.
You swear you can feel her heartbeat from where you stand. The moment is quiet, unrecorded, yet monumental. It's as if the universe has just assigned her a mission she doesn't fully grasp yet. That night, as they camp by the lake, you sit with her near the fire. The men talk loudly about miracles and prophecies, arguing over who will sit closest to the teacher when his kingdom comes.
Mary just watches the flames.
They talk about thrones, she whispers, but he talks about hearts. You smile. She's already starting to sound like him. A quirky tidbit: in the earliest Christian communities, women often led house churches. Ancient inscriptions from Rome and Asia Minor record female names with titles like presbytera, elder, and diakonos, deacon. So Mary's presence among male disciples might not have been an anomaly but a prototype. History, as usual, simply edited her out later. Sometime past midnight, the teacher begins to speak again, not to the crowd, but to a few gathered around the fire. He tells them that true power isn't about rule, but about service. Mary listens, chin resting on her knees. When he pauses, she asks softly, if service is greatness, then why do so few wish to serve? He laughs gently. Because to serve one must see clearly, must still see shadows. You can feel the warmth of the fire, the crackle of wood, the pulse of shared understanding. The men glance at her, uneasy. They're not used to a woman asking questions like that. But he nods, approving. And in that nod, the story of the church quietly shifts, though the world won't realize it for nearly 2 millennia. Later, as the stars scatter across the night, she looks up and murmurs, "The kingdom of heaven feels close." He replies, "Closer than your breath." The phrase lands softly, almost like a lullaby. She smiles, closing her eyes. When dawn creeps across the horizon, you find her still sitting there, awake. The others snore softly under their cloaks, but she's watching the first light touch the waves. Maybe she's already sensing what lies ahead, the storm of betrayal, the agony, the resurrection no one will believe. But for now, she's content. She has found her teacher, her calling, her clarity. You realize something haunting. When future scribes write the Gospels, they'll often omit moments like this. They'll keep her name in the background, just enough to prove she was there, but never enough to show her depth. Yet tonight, you've seen it. You sat beside her while she learned, questioned, and understood. The first woman disciple isn't a saint yet, or a legend, or an icon painted in gold. She's just a woman with dirt on her feet, ideas in her mind, and courage in her heart. But that's enough to change everything.
The fire sputters and she throws in a last twig.
The sparks rise into the dawn like teeny souls set free. Somewhere behind you a rooster crows. History turns a page.
The day begins with the smell of dust and jasmine.
Youth-provoking through the narrow streets of Bethany, now a small village outside Jerusalem, where fig trees lean over wells and bays hum lazily among the blossoms.
The road is crowded, pilgrims, traders, and soldiers moving toward the city for the Passover.
You can feel the tension in the air as subtle hum-band chatter. Everyone's waiting for something. Mary of Magdala walks beside the other women, her sandals powdered white from the road. She's quieter than usual, though her eyes are restless, as if she can sense what's coming. The teacher has grown more solemn too. The laughter that once came easily now carries weight. You can tell the group feels it, that this might be one of their last calm days together. They stop at a familiar house, the home of friends Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. You remember him, the man who was once dead and walked out of his tomb like someone waking from a nap. He greets them with the soft bewilderment of someone who still can't believe he's breathing. The meal that follows feels both joyous and fragile, like a reunion happening too late.
The table fills with roasted lamb, lentils, figs, and warm bread. Candles flicker.
You smell wine, olive oil, and smoke. The teacher sits at the center, speaking softly with Lazarus while the others lean in, hanging on his words. Outside, the sun begins to set, and the air cools.
Then, without warning, Mary of Magdala rises.
She carries a small alabaster jar, white as moonlight, sealed with wax. Everyone falls silent. You can feel the tension. What is she doing? She kneels before the teacher, breaks the jar open, and the scent floods the room. Spikenard, sweet, heavy, intoxicating. It's the kind of perfume used to anoint kings or the dead. The fragrance fills every corner, clinging to skin and fabric.
You felt sie just standing there. You can hear the gasp ripple through the crowd.
What is she doing? Someone whispers. That oil is worth a year's wages. Another voice, sharp and indignant, adds, it could have been sold and given to the poor. The man speaking is Judas, his hand already twitching toward the purse he guards. But Mary doesn't flinch. She pours the perfume slowly, reverently over the teacher's feet, then wipes them with her hair.
The candlelight catches the sheen of oil and tears.
She doesn't speak, but the gesture says everything: devotion, gratitude, maybe even defiance. In that moment, the world holds its breath.
The teacher looks down at her and says quietly, leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing to me.
The room goes silent again, except for the faint crackle of the candles. You can see the disciples shifting awkwardly, unsure whether to admire or condemn. The teacher continues, the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me.
The words settle like stones in the air.
They don't understand, not yet, that he's speaking of his death. But Mary does. You see it in her face. She knows something they don't. She always has. Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. All four Gospels record a version of this event, the anointing of Jesus, but none of them agree on the details. In Matthew and Mark, an unnamed woman anoints his head. In Luke, a sinful woman wipes his feet with her hair. In John, it's explicitly Mary of Bethany. Yet somewhere along the way, later interpreters fused all these women into one, Mary Magdalene. And that's how centuries of confusion began. Now here's the quirky tidbit. Spikenard oil, the same kind Mary uses here, was imported from the Himalayas in small alabaster flasks. It was more expensive than gold. Some ancient traders even called it the scent of immortality. So yes, she just poured a fortune over his feet, but maybe she wasn't wasting it. Maybe she was consecrating something eternal. You watch as the scent lingers. It clings to everything, the floor, the walls, their clothes. Even as they leave the house that night, the fragrance follows them, a ghostly reminder of love given without restraint. Outside the moon rays paled round. The road to Jerusalem lies at darkened uncertain. The teacher walks ahead, his robe catching faint streaks of oil sheen under the torchlight. Behind him, Mary walks silently, the empty alabaster jar still warm in her hands. You can tell she knows the symbolism. She's anointed him for what's coming. You lean closer, and for a moment you can hear her thoughts. If the world won't crown him in life, I'll crown him before death. Historians still argue whether this act was spontaneous or prophetic. Some call it devotion, others call it defiance, a woman performing a priestly act in a culture that didn't allow female priests. Either way, it marks her forever. The teacher doesn't say much as they walk, but his silence feels heavy. The others whisper, still arguing about the waste of perfume. Only Mary remains quiet. The scent of spikenard trails behind her like a ribbon through time. By the next morning, rumors of the act have already spread. In the marketplace, merchants are talking. Did you hear? The woman from Magdala poured oil on him as if he were a king. Some laugh, others shake their heads. You can feel how dangerous such talk is. Rome already fears rebellion, and the temple priests don't like anyone being called anointed. You follow Mary to the edge of the crowd. She wedges the tea enter Jerusalem on a donkey, palm branches waving, shares wheezing like tender. For a moment it feels like triumph, but her face says otherwise. She knows celebrations like this can turn into executions overnight. The next few days pass in a blur. You catch fragments of teaching in courtyards, heated debates with priests, and whispers of betrayal. Through it all, Mary stays near, quiet but vigilant. She helps the women prepare meals, tends to the sick, and listens to every word he says, storing them like precious stones. One night, while the others sleep, she sits alone outside the camp. The stars are sharp, they are cool. You sit beside her unseen. It's strange, she murmurs, how everyone fears losing what they never really owned. You realize she's not talking about wealth or life, she's talking about him. The next morning, soldiers pass on horseback, their armor glinting. You feel the mode shift, the weight of inevitability pressing down. She clutches the alabaster jar to her chest, though it's empty now. Maybe she keeps it as proof that love once dared to act before the world was ready. A single drop of oil still clings to its rim, catching the sunlight. You can smell it faintly, sweet, heavy, eternal. Centuries later, artists will paint this scene in gold and shadow. They'll give her flowing hair and downcast eyes, a picture of repentance. But you've seen the truth tonight. She wasn't begging for forgiveness, she was making history. While men debated theology, she performed the most radical act of faith in the room. And somewhere deep inside you can sense it, that scent of spikenard never really faded. It just moved through time from that small house in Bethany to cathedrals and whispered prayers, reminding anyone who dares to listen that love, when poured out freely, never goes to waste. You wake to the faint sound of quilts scratching parchment. The year is decades later, yet somehow you're still there, drifting through time like dust in a sunbeam. The room smells of ink and wax. Candlelight flickers over scrolls as men in robes lean over their writing desks. They're copying words, holy words, and you can almost hear the careful rhythm: dip, lift, stroke, pause. Dip again. The scriptures are being preserved, but also changed. You lean closer and notice something strange. A lamb hair is missing. The woman who anointed the teacher, the one who stood beside him when others ran, is slowly being written out. Not erased all at once, but diluted, thinned into silence. One scribe hesitates over a line that used to read Mary of Magdala. He bites his lip, glances around, and writes instead, a certain woman.
And just like that, she begins to fade.
You move among the monks, centuries spinning like pages. The early followers are gone now. New leaders have taken their place, shaping the faith into structure, hierarchy, and doctrine. They prefer neat lines, not blurred boundaries. A woman standing at the center of a sacred story doesn't fit their plans.
So they merge her with others, Mary of Bethany, the anonymous sinner, the woman caught in adultery, until her identity becomes a tangle of contradictions. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or accidental. Some blame the confusion on oral tradition, where stories were told and retold before being written. Others whisper that the merging was deliberate, a way to quiet the memory of a woman whose authority rivaled the apostles. You watch as the edits continue. In one copy she's called Magdalene, a title that once meant tower or watchtower. In another, she's simply the woman from whom 7 demons were cast out. It's a clever shift. Strip her of her insight, replace it with affliction, and soon the tower crumbles into rumor. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 4th century, church leaders like Pope Gregory the Great publicly identified Mary Magdalene with the repentant sinner in Luke's Gospel. His sermon in the year 591 cemented her reputation as a fallen woman, even though the text never said she was one. It was one of the most influential theological mix-ups in history, lasting nearly 1,400 years. You imagine the scene, Rome's marble halls echoing as Gregory speaks, his voice solemn. She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary, we believe to be the same person. The congregation nods. The decision becomes doctrine.
And just like that, the woman once called apostle to the apostles becomes the penitent prostitute. You feel the shift like a tremor through time.
Paintings begin to change.
In early icons, she's robed in red and gold, holding a scroll or a jar, a teacher, a witness.
In later centuries, the scroll disappears. The jar stays.
The red deepens into the color of sin, and her gaze turns downward.
You realize how powerful art can be. It's not just pigment, it's propaganda in gold leaf. A quirky tidbit for tonight: in the Middle Ages, some monks claimed that Mary Magdalene's long hair had miraculously grown to clothe her naked body during her supposed years of repentance in the desert. Artists loved this image. It let them paint her both holy and sensual at once, a paradox the Church never officially endorsed but quietly allowed, because it kept her fascinating yet safely subdued. You watch a monk in Provence carve her likeness on a cathedral wall. His chisel moves lovingly over the stone. He gives her flowing hair, soft eyes, and a small alabaster jar. He doesn't know that centuries later, people will touch that carving and pray for redemption, not realizing they're asking help from a woman who was never fallen in the first place. You follow her legend westward, to France, where storytellers claim she arrived by sea after the crucifixion, carrying a jar of oil and her unshakable faith. They say she preached in Marseille, lived in a cave, and died gazing at angels.
The story grows richer, stronger, layered like the pages of a palimpsest.
Maybe it was myth-making, maybe it was survival. When the official church turned her into a symbol of sin, the people turned her into a saint of their own making. You stand by a medieval fire pit where pilgrims huddle, whispering her name. They tell stories of her miracles, how she appeared to sailors in storms, how she healed the hopeless. One woman says she understands women like us. And that's the thing, isn't it? Even buried under distortion, Mary's presence remains magnetic. The Church could rename her, repaint her, redefine her, but it couldn't erase her.
still, something darker creeps in.
The image of the penitent harlot spreads across Europe like wildfire. Sermons warn women not to speak too boldly, not to think too deeply, lest they become another Magdalene. You feel the irony burn. The woman who spoke truth first now becomes the example of why women shouldn't speak at all. You drift forward again to dusty university libraries where early scholars begin to question the narrative. Is it possible, one mutters, that we have misunderstood her? He compares manuscripts, traces linguistic patterns, and notices something startling. The earliest texts never conflate the Magdalene with the sinner. That connection appears only centuries later. It's like discovering a missing thread that changes the entire tapestry.
But here's where it gets more mysterious. Some Gnostic writings, buried for ages in Egyptian sand, describe her differently, not as fallen, but as enlightened. They call her the companion of the Savior, the one who understood his hidden teachings.
He loved her more than all the disciples. One text reads, though historians still argue whether love meant affection, friendship, or spiritual kinship. And so you begin to see the pattern. The woman who once poured perfume becomes, over time, the woman whose story was rewritten to control how others perceive faith, purity, and authority.
It's a story of erasure disguised as devotion. You wander through a monastery hallway, candles flickering along the stone. At the end of the corridor you find a fresco half hidden behind desk.
It shows the Last Supper, not the one you know, but a different version. There, beside the teacher, sits a woman. Her posture mirrors his, her expression calm and knowing. You trace the faded paint with your fingertip. Was she always there, or did some forgotten artist secretly restore what the texts removed? Your thoughts spiral with possibilities. Maybe the real miracle isn't that she was misunderstood, but that she survived misunderstanding at all.
By now, her name has become two names, Magdalene the Sinner and Magdalene the Saint. The contradiction keeps her alive in collective memory.
Each age remakes her in its own image, saint, scholar, heretic, muse. And yet, somewhere beneath all those layers of paint and sermon and story, the real woman still waits, unbroken.
Outside and light seeps through the windows.
The monks keep writing, copying, correcting, polishing the word. They believe they're preserving truth. Maybe they are. But you know what truth feels like? It's warm, human, inconvenient. It doesn't fit neatly into doctrine. You pause by one of the scribes, watching him finish a line, and she departed and told the disciples all these things. He sets down his quill, sighs, and adds no name.
No Name. It's strange, isn't it? You can almost hear her voice whispering beneath the ink, steady and soft, I am still here. Night falls heavy over Jerusalem.
You can almost taste the dust in the air, that mix of sweat, spice, and unease. The city is swollen with pilgrims, soldiers, and suspicion. Oil lamps burn low, and every alley hums with rumor.
Something is unraveling. You can feel it, like a rope fraying thread by thread. You're standing in the courtyard of an upper room now, hidden behind latticed shutters. Inside, the teacher sits with his disciples around a long, narrow table. The smell of roasted lamb mingles with the sharper tang of wine. Laughter bubbles up, forced, too bright for the mood. The others don't understand yet that this is their last meal together.
Mary of Magdala isn't at the table. She's in the shadows nearby, helping the women prepare food, her hands steady even as her pulse races. You notice the way she glances toward the door every few minutes, as if she knows something terrible is approaching. She's always known before the others.
Through the open window, you can hear fragments of the conversation. Breathbreaking. The teacher's calm voice saying words that no one quite grasps. One of you will betray me. The room stills.
The disciples shift uncomfortably, their faces half-lit in lamplight. You watch Judas clutch his cup too tightly, his eyes flicking toward the door. The teacher's gaze lingers on him a moment too long, and something passes between them, pity maybe, or resignation.
You see Mary's Hand Pause mit Motion.
She's heard the same words, and her face tightens. She steps back unseen into the hallway. The world seems to hold its breath. Moments later, the teacher and his closest followers rise and walk into the night, heading toward the Mount of Olives. Mary hesitates, then follows at a distance, her cloak drawn close. You follow her, your sandals whispering against the cobblestones. The moon is nearly full, hanging low over the city like a watchful eye. The garden is quiet, only the chirr of insects and the rustle of olive leaves in the wind. The teacher kneels to pray, his voice breaking in the stillness. You hear him whisper, "Let this cup pass from me," and even the trees seem to tremble. The others, exhausted, fall asleep one by one. But not Mary. She stays awake, keeping watch. You can see her lips moving soundlessly, echoing his words.
And then it happens. The crunch of boots on gravel.
Torches flaring in the darkness. A mob of soldiers and temple guards surges into the garden.
Judas walks ahead of them, his face pale and determined. You feel Mary's breath catch. The teacher doesn't resist. He steps forward, calm, and asks, "Whom do you seek?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they reply. "I am he."
They move to bind him, rough and efficient. One of the disciples draws a sword and strikes, but the teacher stops him. "Put it away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?"
The world spins into chaos, shooting, confusion, torches jerking wildly.
In the shadows, Mary presses herself against a tree trunk, trying not to cry out.
The smell of Iran and sweet fills the air. And then, just like that, he's gone, dragged into the night.
You follow her as she runs after them, her sandals slipping on loose stones.
The city gates close behind the soldiers.
She keeps her distance, heart hammering, eyes locked on the flickering torches ahead. You can almost feel her pulse in your own veins. At dawn, they bring him to trial before the council. The crowd gathers in the courtyard, priests, merchants, curious onlookers. The teacher stands silent, his face bruised but composed. Peter lurks at the edge, denying him with trembling lips. The others are nowhere to be seen. Only Mary remains close enough to see everything. She doesn't shout or plead. She just watches, her jaw set. You can see the fear in her, yes, but beneath it burns something stronger, resolve. Here's your mainstream historical fact. According to all four Gospels, nearly every male disciple fled after the arrest. But the women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome and others, stayed. They watched the trial, the execution and the burial. Their names are listed again and again, witnesses to what the others could not bear to see. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some apocryphal writings suggest Mary bribed guards to learn where the teacher's body would be placed, ensuring she could anoint him properly after the Sabbath. There's no way to prove it, but it sounds exactly like something she would do, quietly defying rules for the sake of devotion. The trial ends quickly. The verdict is death. The city buzzes with unease, pretending not to care. Soldiers march in through the streets while jeering crowds follow. Mary moves with them, keeping her distance but never losing sight. Her cloak is drawn tight around her, but tears streak her face. Historians still argue whether she was at the foot of the cross from the very beginning or arrived later when the crowd thinned. But all agree on this: she was there when the others weren't. You feel the heat of midday beating down as the soldiers hammer the nails. The sound is awful, echoing off stone and skin alike.
The sky darkens unnaturally. You want to look away, but you can't. Neither can she.
Hours pass. The teacher speaks a few final words, some tender, some shattered by pain.
Mary's hands grip the edge of the rocky ground.
You hear her whisper, "Don't leave us," even as his head bows forward.
There grows still heavy. The earth itself seems to exhale. By evening, the crowd disperses.
Mary stays behind with two others, her robe smeared with dust. Together, they watch as a small group of followers takes down the body. The men are hurried, nervous. It's nearly Sabbath. They can't linger. They wrap him quickly in linen and carry him to a nearby tomb. The women follow silently, noting every turn of the path, every stone.
As the men leave, Mary lingers.
She kneels by the sealed entrance, pressing her palm against the cool rock. Her lips move in a whisper you can barely hear, "I'll be back." Then she stands, straightens her cloak, and walks into the darkness.
You follow her back through the silent streets.
The lamps are out now. In a small house on the city's edge, she collapses to her knees, trembling. The others sit in stunned silence. The teacher is gone.
Hope feels like smoke, real one moment, gone the next.
But Mary doesn't weep long. Even in grief, she begins to plan. She will return after the Sabbath. She will finish what began in Bethany. No one will stop her, not priests, not soldiers, not fear. And that's when you understand faith isn't loud. It isn't always a sermon or a miracle.
Sometimes it's a woman walking alone in the dark, refusing to let lofty unburied. You watch her blow out the lamp, the room plunging into shadow. Her hands are still stained with traces of oil and dust. The faint scent of Spekenerd lingers, a memory, a promise. Outside Jerusalem sleeps ohne sie.
But in one small corner of the city, a quiet rebellion begins. Not with swords or speeches, but with one woman's decision to stay when everyone else has run. Tomorrow she will return to the tomb. And the world, though it doesn't know it yet, will never be the same again. Dawn comes gray and trembling, the kind of morning where the air itself feels like it's holding its breath. You stand on the outskirts of the city with Mary of Magdala and the other women, Mary, mother of James, and Salome, each carrying small jars of oil and spice. Their cloaks are drawn tight, hoods pulled low. The city behind them is silent, except for the distant bleat of goats and the faint clang of a Roman patrol changing shifts.
It's the third day.
You can almost feel her pulse racing beneath her shawl. Sleep hasn't touched her eyes since the crucifixion. Every step she takes now is driven by something stronger than exhaustion, duty, love, maybe the desperate hope that she's wrong about what she saw.
They pass winds through olive groves still slick with thee, their sandals squish softly in the dirt.
A few crows croak from the walls above. You can smell the faint sweetness of the spices they carry, aloes, myrrh, cinnamon. These are burial scents meant to mask the smell of death, but today they feel more like weapons of faith. When they reach the tomb, the sky has just begun to brighten. The first streaks of pink slice through the gray, and that's when they stop. You can feel the shock ripple through them before a word is spoken.
The stone is gone, rolled aside as if by invisible hands. Mary frees her. For a heartbeat, no one moves.
Again Salome gasps, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The entrance gapes dark and open, the seal broken. You can smell the cold, earthy scent of the cave. The air feels wrong, too light, too expectant.
Mary doesn't hesitate.
She rushes forward, nearly tripping on her robe, and ducks inside. You follow her, the walls close and damp. The light from the rising sun stretches long across the floor, and there on the stone slab where the body should be are only strips of linen folded neatly.
It's quiet except for the faint drip of condensation from the ceiling. And then a voice, calm but unfamiliar. Why do you seek the living among the dead? You will Ahund.
Two figures stand where the shadows had been, bright, faceless, robed in light that doesn't seem to come from the sun. Their presence hums in the air, not frightening, just overwhelming. The women stumble back, shielding their eyes.
He is not here, the voice continues. He is risen.
Mary's breath catches, but her mind refuses to believe it.
Risen? It's impossible. Dead men don't walk.
Yet something deep inside her trembles, not with fear, but recognition. The women flee from the tomb, stumbling into daylight, their jaws forgotten. The city walls loom in the distance, their gates just opening. The others run ahead, shouting half-formed sentences. He's gone.
The tomb is empty. But Mary stops midway down the path. Her body is shaking. The others are too far ahead now, their footsteps fading. She turns back.
You follow her as she retraces her steps to the tomb. She can't let it end like this, with confusion, with rumors. She kneels beside the entrance, her hands pressed into the cold earth, and begins to sob. It's not just grief, it's frustration. She's tired of mysteries. Tired of being told to wait, to believe, to hope.
And then footsteps behind her. She turns.
At first, she sees only a silhouette trackeartiers, a man standing in the garden.
The early sun glows behind him, too bright to see his face. Why are you weeping? He asks gently. Whom do you seek?
She thinks he's the gardener. Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, she pleads, her voice breaking. I will take him.
And then he says her name. Just one word. Mary. The sound of its slice struck the morning like a bell.
She freezes, her breath catching in her throat. Every nerve in her body recognizes that voice.
She looks up, and suddenly the word makes sense again.
The man before her smiles, not with triumph but with quiet knowing. Rabboni, she whispers, the old Aramaic word for teacher.
Your fair time stop. The wind stills, the birds fall silent.
The garden, the tomb, the entire universe seems to hang on that single heartbeat of recognition. She reaches out to touch him, to make sure he's real, but he steps back gently. Do not hold on to me, he says softly, for I have not yet ascended. 'Tis no lichtning, no tender, no celestial music, just a light heartbeat and the souls in the stillness between life and legend. Here's your mainstream historical fact. All four Gospels agree that Mary Magdalene was the first witness to the resurrection. In John's account, she is the first to see and speak to the risen Christ, long before Peter or any of the others. In other words, the entire foundation of Christian belief began with her testimony.
And the quirky tidbit.
In some ancient Eastern icons, she's painted holding a red egg. According to legend, when she told Emperor Tiberius that Christ had risen, he scoffed, saying it was as impossible as an egg turning red. So she held up an egg, and, so the story goes, it turned crimson in her hands. To this day, Eastern Orthodox Christians still dye Easter eggs red in her memory. Historians still argue whether her vision at the tomb was literal, symbolic, or spiritual. Some call it a genuine miracle, others suggest it was grief transfigured into revelation. But either way, the story marks the first time in recorded scripture that a woman becomes the messenger of resurrection, a role that rewrites everything.
Mary doesn't linger.
The moment she understands what she's seen, she runs. You can hear her sandals slap against the stone path, her breath ragged but determined. Through the city gates, down narrow alleys, past startled vendors just opening their stalls. She bursts into the upper room where the disciples hide and gasps, "I have seen the Lord."
They don't believe her. Of course they don't. You can see the disbelief in their faces, the dismissal, the condescension. She's emotional von Mutters. Grief makes people see things. Another shakes his head. A woman's testimony can't be trusted. But Mary stands her ground, her voice low and steady. "I saw him. He spoke to me." And in that instant, you can sense the fracture beginning, the split between what was witnessed and what would later be written. You look at her, standing there among men who refuse to believe the truth she's already touched. And you realize this is the moment everything changes.
Faith, history, and gender collide in one breath. A woman's word becomes the hinge of salvation, even if the world refuses to listen. As the sun rises higher, light floods through the narrow window.
Dust motes swirl like tiny galaxies. Mary closes her eyes, whispering a prayer of gratitude. Somewhere faintly, you think you can smell spikenard again.
And just like that, the world turns quietly forever different. The rumor spreads like fire through dry reeds. By noon, the whole city is whispering about the empty tomb. Some call it blasphemy, others hysteria. The priests send word to the Roman guard, demanding answers. The soldiers swear the body was stolen while they slept, though their eyes dart nervously when questioned. A soldier who truly believes in his innocence doesn't tremble when speaking.
You can see it. There's fear beneath their armor, something they can't explain and dare not admit.
Peter and John are the first to run to the tomb after Mary's words. They race through the dusty alleys, cloaks flapping behind them. John arrives first, but hesitates at the entrance. Peter storms past, as always bold, impulsive, his heart hammering. Inside, he finds only linen cloths, folded deliberate.
The body is gone. No signs of struggle, no torn wrappings, no blood. Only stillness, only mystery.
They return to the others in silence. There are no words to bridge the gap between what they expected and what they saw. The air in the upper room is thick with disbelief. Thomas, Eva the skeptic, leans back against the wall, his arms crossed.
"Unless I see the wounds myself," he mutters, "I will not believe." That night, fear reigns. The doors are bolted. Every creak of the floorboard sounds like the approach of soldiers.
Outside Jerusalem sleeps uneasily. Inside 11 men sit in shadows torn between fight and despair.
And then, without warning, the air shifts. It's not sound that changes first, but presence.
Like the breeze before a storm, heavy and electric, you can feel the hair rise on your arms.
And there, in the middle of the locked room, stands a figure. He doesn't knock. He doesn't push the door. He simply is. "Peace be with you," he says. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then Peter stumbles back, nearly overturning a lamp. John's breath catches. The others stare, wide-eyed, their minds scrambling to make sense of what they're seeing. It's him.
But not him as before. His face glows with a calm unlike anything mortal. The wounds are still visible, hands, feet, side, but they no longer bleed. They shimmer faintly as if light itself flows from them.
"Why are you troubled?" he asks gently. "Why do doubts rise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself."
He extends his hands, palms open. Peter hesitates, then reaches forward, trembling, and touches the scar. It's real, warm.
Alive. The breath leaves his chest in a shuddering sob. The others fall to their knees. Some cry, some laugh. The room fills with disbelief and joy in equal measure. He smiles softly, almost amused by their awe. "Have you anything to eat?" he asks. They scramble to offer him a piece of broiled fish and honeycomb. He eats it slowly, deliberately, as if to show them that spirit and flesh now coexist in perfect harmony.
And then he says the words that will echo through centuries: "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." He breathes upon them. A warm wind ripples through the room, though the windows remain closed. Receive the Holy Spirit.
You feel something vast move through you, like light flooding every corner of your being.
For a moment, everything makes sense. The suffering, the Zelängs did him.
Death wasn't the end, it was a doorway. But Thomas isn't there.
When the others tell him later, he laughs bitterly. "You all saw what you wanted to see," he says. Grief plays tricks on the mind. His voice cracks, betraying the conflict inside him. "Unless I put my finger into the mark of the nails and my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week passes. The disciples remain in the upper room, unsure what to do next. Outside, the world continues, markets buzz, children play, life moves on. Yet inside, time feels suspended. They wait for something they can't name.
And then once again the room fills with light. The same voice, the same calm. "Peace be with you." Thomas phrases. The others step aside. The figure turns to him, eyes full of gentleness. "Thomas," he says, "put your finger here. See my hands. Reach your hand and place it in my side. Do not be faithless, but believing."
You can see the tremor in Thomas's hand as he reaches forward. His fingertips brush the scar, and in that instant all his doubt collapses. He falls to his knees, tears streaking his face. "My Lord and my God."
The figure smiles faintly. "You believe because you have seen. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." The air glows for a moment longer, and then he is gone again, like breath exhaled into eternity. Here's your historical note. The story of doubting Thomas became a cornerstone of faith for early Christians. It wasn't meant to shame doubt, but to sanctify the struggle between belief and reason. The early church used his story to welcome skeptics, not condemn them. Even Augustine wrote, "He doubted that we might not doubt." And an odd little fact, in ancient Syrian tradition, Thomas was said to have traveled east to India, spreading the word along the spice routes. To this day, the St. Thomas Christians of Kerala trace their origins to him, saying he arrived in 52 CE. But tonight, in that locked room, the meaning of resurrection shifts again. You sense that this moment is not just a return from death, it's the beginning of something cosmic. The dividing wall between divine and human has cracked. The resurrected one is not merely a restored man, but a being transformed, matter and spirit fused, like light wearing flesh. And in his presence you understand something the texts only hint at. Resurrection isn't reversal, it's evolution. The others, still trembling, begin to speak in low voices. Peter whispers, "He's not the same." John answers, "No, he's more." Outside, the night deepens. The oil lamps flicker. A moth beats its wings against the flame over and over, drawn to the light even though it burns. You realize you are like that moth, aching to touch what you cannot comprehend. In the silence that follows, Peter turns to the group. "If this is true," he says slowly, "then everything changes. Not just for us, for the Word." John nods. "Then we must tell them." And so begins the story that will ripple through centuries, told, retold, argued, rewritten, but always carrying the same pulse beneath its surface, the impossible made real.
For now, though, the city sleeps. The disciples sit together, not speaking, each one nursing a fragile ember of belief. Somewhere, in the quiet between their breaths, you can almost hear it, the faint echo of wings.
Maybe angels. Maybe memory. Maybe the sound of something ancient and divine stirring again in the hearts of humankind. Whatever it is, it changes you too.
The air outside still smells of olive trees and dust when you find yourself standing beside her again, the woman from Magdala. Her face is calm now, the storm of grief replaced by something gentler, steadier. She doesn't tremble when she speaks. You can tell she has seen too much to ever be afraid again. Around her, the others are murmuring, arguing in half-whispers.
The word resurrection trembles in there like a secret too heavy to hold. You hear Peter's voice first. They won't believe us, he says. They'll call it madness.
Mary looks at him quietly.
They already do, she replies. But it doesn't matter.
There's a pause. You realize that this woman, once dismissed as broken, as a follower at the edge of the crowd, is now the one with the clearest eyes in the room. She isn't talking about reputation or danger. She's talking about truth. In the earliest days after the resurrection, stories spread like wildfire, but not all flames burned the same color. Some said she was the first to see him. Others insisted it was Peter or the beloved disciple. Historians still argue whether the accounts were meant to compete or to complete each other.
But if you listen closely, you notice something subtle. Every version carries a trace of her voice.
She becomes known among the earliest believers as Apostola Apostolorum, the apostle to the apostles. It's not a title given lightly. She was the one who carried the message no one else dared. He is risen. Without her, the resurrection might have remained only a rumor whispered in alleys. You watch her stand before the others, her hands trembling slightly, though her voice doesn't waver. He told me to go and tell you, she says, looking from face to face. Tell them that I have seen the Lord.
It's a simple message, but the words are volcanic.
They fall into silence. The same men who once debated who was the greatest among them now look at her as though the world itself has turned upside down. You can almost feel their conflict, faith colliding with pride. In that culture, a woman's testimony wasn't legally valid. In the courts of Judea, 2 women equaled 1 man's witness. And yet, here she is, the first preacher of the greatest mystery in human history. The paradox is too large for some to bear. You can see Peter's jaw tighten. You sense the old habits of authority rising in him like muscle memory. We must confirm it ourselves, he mutters. Mary meets his gaze without flinching. You already have, she says softly.
You just don't believe what you SRV. For a heartbeat, the tension is electric.
Then John steps between them, his voice low and warm. If he chose her first, he says, then maybe we're the ones who need to catch up. That line lands like a spark in dry grass. The silence after it hums with recognition, painful, humbling, necessary. A historical fact worth noting: early Christian communities preserved traces of this moment. In the 2nd century, Church Father Hippolytus referred to her as the one who became an apostle to the apostles. Even Clement of Alexandria, in an age suspicious of female authority, admitted she saw him first and became the first messenger of the good news.
But of course, history is never kind to women who speak before men are ready to listen.
Later scribes will soften her, reshape her, blur her into the background. Some will even merge her with others, Mary of Bethany, the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet, until her identity becomes a patchwork of contradictions. Was she a saint?
A sinner? Both? You lean closer and she seems to whisper through centuries, why not both?
Her message begins to spread beyond the upper room, carried by word of mouth across Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria. At night, small gatherings light oil lamps and retell her story. She saw him, they whisper. She spoke with him. He called her by name. And it's not just the story they repeat, it's the pattern. The idea that revelation can come through anyone, not just those with titles or authority. That's the dangerous seed she plants, the democratization of the divine. Fringe tradition holds that she later traveled north, perhaps with John, maybe even to Ephesus or Gaul. There's a medieval tale, half legend, half memory, that she lived as a hermit in a cave near Marseille, her hair grown long, her days spent in prayer. Historians still argue whether this was myth-making or memory, a symbolic retelling of her silence after being silenced. But in the early decades after the resurrection, her influence lingers in unexpected ways. You hear it in the voices of other women who begin to preach, teach, prophesy, Eunia, Phoebe, Thecla. The movement she helped ignite becomes something no empire can contain. Here's a quirky detail. In some early Christian art found in the catacombs of Rome, you can spot a woman standing among the apostles, her hand raised in blessing, wearing the same red robes later reserved for Christ himself. Some scholars say it's Mary Magdalene, others say it's symbolic. But either way, the message is unmistakable. Someone remembered. And yet, her story doesn't remain pure for long. Power always rewrites memory. As Christianity grows, structure replaces spontaneity, hierarchy replaces fire. The woman who once ran barefoot from the tomb becomes inconvenient. Still, for now, she stands radiant among the fearful and the faithful. Her voice is steady as she speaks of the light she saw. He told me, she says, that death is not the end, that everything broken can be made whole. The room softens. Even Peter's frown eases. The others draw closer, not to question, but to listen. You realize something remarkable is happening. For the first time, this movement that will someday span the globe is listening to a woman. It's fleeting, fragile, but real. You think about how strange that must feel for her, to be the messenger of the greatest miracle, and yet to know how quickly her words might be dismissed. To feel the weight of eternity pressing through her throat, knowing that men will one day edit her out of her own story. But she speaks anyway. And that's the real miracle, not the empty tomb, but her refusal to stay silent. Some nights later, you find her alone by the olive grove, the moonlight silver on her face. She looks toward the horizon where dawn is beginning to bloom. They'll forget, she murmurs, but not forever. You stand beside her in silence. The wind carries the scent of earth and myrrh. Some wäre aneit bird calls. Do you think they'll ever understand, you ask? She smiles faintly. They will. When the world grows tired of pretending men can speak for God alone. Centuries will pass before her prophecy comes true. Councils will meet, empires will rise, and theologians will debate whether her role was literal or symbolic. But in that quiet moment, her faith feels larger than history itself. When she finally turns to leave, you see a glimmer in her eyes, not sorrow, not triumph, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've done what you were sent to do. And as she disappears down the narrow path toward the city, you realize something else. This story, the one that began in silence and ends in revelation, isn't about death or resurrection alone. It's about the courage to be the first voice in a world built on echoes. You close your eyes, hearing her words echo still. Go and tell them. The years begin to stretch like shadows at sunset. What was once an urgent, whispered faith turns into ritual and institution. The fire that started in small rooms becomes cathedrals of marble and gold. You walk through centuries without moving, feeling how time smooths sharp truths into acceptable stories. And somewhere in that smoothing, her name, the woman from Magdala, starts to blur. You first notice it in the writings of men who never met her. Theologians, bishops, scholars, men with quills sharper than swords. They debate her character the way gamblers argue over dice.
Some call her the faithful witness,
Others, the penitent sinner. But the truth is more dangerous than either label. She was a teacher. In 591 CE, Pope Gregory I stands before a crowd in Rome and delivers a sermon that will echo for more than a millennium. He claims that the woman who anointed Jesus' feet with perfume, the unnamed sinner from Luke's Gospel, was Mary Magdalene. And just like that, history tilts. With a single homily, her identity fuses with shame. The apostle to the apostles becomes the fallen woman redeemed. You can almost hear the sound